Hello and welcome to this EVCOM broadcast. So I'm Dale Parmenter, CEO of DRPG, and we're coming to you from our studios here in Worcestershire. Now, before we get going, though, we've got a couple of commercials. Firstly, to tell you about the virtual Clarion Awards, which is next week. Tickets for sale on the EVCOM website. It's a great deal, £55 for 10 logins. There we go. Plus there's other price points for freelancers, members and non-members. I say the event takes place on the 16th of July and please be registered by end of play on the 14th. And also the EVCOM Industry Live and Film Awards, we've got an extended deadline for entries, which is till Monday the 13th of July. So get those entries in. So, on to the content and designing a hybrid. I'm joined virtually on the sofa by Charlotte Gentry, who's the founder and CEO of Pure Comms Group, Dax Callner, Strategy Director of Smyle, and Mike Harper, Managing Director of Firehouse. So, during the broadcast, if you've got any questions, please type them in to the portal and I'll be picking them up here on the iPad. So we've got 70 people online already. Great. So we've seen a huge growth in virtual events over the last few months. And even from these studios, we've produced over 140 programs going out. So as face-to-face events come back online, will we see a shift to hybrid in that meantime? But first, what is a hybrid event? And I'm going to ask all the panel that question in a second. I'm going to start with you, Mike. You've produced many hybrid events, particularly in that internal comms world. What does hybrid mean to you?
Thanks, Dale. Well, a hybrid, simply, I think, is an event that integrates both live and virtual elements simultaneously, you know, where participants aren't bound by physical or geographical limitations. I do think hybrid is a bit of a current buzzword that's a catch-all for a number of ways of communicating that previously existed, but are now going through a rapid evolution, you know, to meet the new comms challenges we're experiencing. But as you well know, live events producers are very resourceful. They're very adaptable and agile, and I think we're now starting to meet, you know, this demand, this new demand. You know, my experience from an internal comms perspective is that at one end of the spectrum, you know, traditionally a hybrid would involve a broadcast hub with a live audience and then a series of other remote locations, which are often in different countries, also with live audiences that are all connected together two-way via the internet, or back in the day it would have been satellite. And at the other end, it could be something as simple as single location broadcasts with an opportunity for people to interact online with each other and with guests at the location. And I think the real-time two-way connection is the differentiator. It's not a broadcast, it's not passive. The content and the way it's delivered has got to be engaging, of course, but it's about creating dialogue, conversation, and encouraging involvement and participation, you know, whatever those methods might be.
Charlotte, how would you describe it? What's it for you?
Thanks, Dale. I'm not sure that I can necessarily add a huge amount to what Mike has just described it as, except I think in the current market conditions, because we may well, when we come out the other side of this, it may well have changed what we perceive this to be. But currently, to us, it means a live event potentially with reduced numbers of delegates, with the content and experience being streamed in one format or another. To a wider audience, where those individuals don't need to be present in the venue or are simply experiencing it from a remote location.
Great, thanks. Dax, what's your experience of hybrid?
I mean, my only disagreement would be with the word streamed out to virtual, because I think if it's an event, it has to be more than a stream of content. But essentially, straightforward definition, a live experience with physical attendees and digital attendees, and that's a hybrid.
And staying with you, Dax, so we're seeing lots of restrictions on travel. We assume that's going to continue on for the foreseeable future, but also the talk around climate change and sustainability. You know, is it going to be ethical to put thousands and thousands of people on planes and fly them into one location? Is the global big conventions, conferences, do we see that landscape changing, using the technology now to have more regional events? What's your take on that?
Yeah, this is a complicated question, I think. First of all, it may be over for really large scale conventions that we've seen in the past, at least for years to come. And I don't think it's just government restrictions. And by the way, government restrictions will vary greatly based on where people are in the world. It's going to be very different in the US versus the UK or Brazil, which is a mess right now as well. So we're not going to see that kind of global audiences coming together at a single location, I would say, for years to come. But even beyond governmental restrictions is the mindset around this. Are people going to want to congregate in enormous numbers? Are they going to want to get on a plane and go somewhere where there's that lingering fear, even if we get past the pandemic, that could potentially affect our industry for years to come? So I think we have to consider hybrid as a model, a long-term model, even if and when physical events do start to return.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're right. And Charlotte, so, okay, we get a briefing and the event lends itself or requires a hybrid element. Where do you start?
I think you have to start very much with looking at the objectives of what it is you're trying to achieve, and that would apply just by producing a live event on its own. But now more than ever, I think there has also been such a not a knee-jerk reaction, but there is such a reaction to just putting everything online. I think the one now needs more than ever to look at the events piece as being part of a much bigger integrated communications campaign. I think the need to communicate is bigger than ever right now, and so one needs to look at what that mode of communication needs to be. And it may be that producing a hybrid event is actually not right necessarily for the objective that you have around this particular piece of communication. And so looking at the comms piece and saying, okay, let's look at what it is we actually need to achieve. That may be through a distribution of material. It may be through distribution of content in some realm or another, which obviously a lot of that content could be produced as part of an event anyway. But I think one needs to look at it in much broader terms now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, you produce these events. I've seen some of the stuff you've done. What's in your mindset when you're talking with a client to say, hey, this really lends itself now to joining up several locations in a two-way engaging process? Where do you start with all of that?
Well, I think, as Charlotte said, it's just clarifying that brief. Why do you want to bring a virtual element? What's its relevance? And, what's going to be the scope in terms of the number of locations and interactivity? And, the development of content and virtual have to go hand in hand. So it's all about captivating people and keeping them energized through this, through their experience. I think we've just got to be careful because, there could be this inevitable fatigue of seeing this procession of talking heads. So it's, what can you do with other techniques now? Augmented reality, gamification, all that great live interaction, not about using gimmicks, but it's about audiences remembering what you've said because you've created a memorable experience for them. And I think you just have to go through and ensure you go through a due diligence process. And I'm sure everybody understands that, as with anything that's connected with a live element, the devil in the detail is vital. So checking and testing any location that's going to be virtually connected. Inevitably, standalone venues, conference halls, hotels, cinema chains, they're all going to be looking for a piece of the action, to position themselves in the hybrid market. You just have to go through that due diligence just to make sure that they've got the right digital infrastructure. They've got a managed connectivity, it's dedicated, with high speed, stable IP distribution. So, because you're going to be sending large amounts of data backwards and forwards, live vision and video. I think also there's going to be a responsibility for them to ensure, that their visitors feel safe and they're not compromised. What is going to be their protocol now in this new norm. So I think it's, that due diligence, that's preparing yourself is absolutely vital.
Right, and I think you picked up on a point there around augmented reality and engagement, and we'll talk about experiences in a second. We've done an event for many years, 4,500 people across the globe. It's a global organisation, just 50 people in the main hub in London, and then we got others in Africa may have 400, in the States may have 300, maybe just one person sat in Hong Kong in bed with their laptop. So it's creating, you're right, creating that experience. So everybody, whether they're in the room or whether they're online, whether they're with a group of people or whether they're just on their own, is getting that one. And AR is actually a good place to start. And we did an AR piece with this client where the CEO back in London was in an AR environment, and then we were projecting that out. So everybody's getting the same experience, but we're receiving information back in as well, which is adding to that wealth of engagement. And Dax, on that, what other tips can you give to create that experience so we're getting that same experience, whether they're online or in the room?
Well, I actually don't think it should be the same experience necessarily. First of all, I'll say I believe in events, and I think we are event marketing professionals for a reason, because we understand its power. And its power lies not just in the consumption of content. It's not just people sitting in front of a plenary speaker, absorbing what that person is saying. There are the things that make an event good that I think we need to bring into the digital sphere for the virtual part of the hybrid model mix. However, I think that the experience of the physical attendee and the experience of the digital attendee can be different, but they both have to be good. I think that's the hard part of what event marketers need to consider and bring their creativity to when it comes to virtual and hybrid events. So for example, one of the reasons people go to events is to meet their peers and talk shop with people like them that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. That works very organically in a physical environment. You can set up like birds of a feather and networking sessions and those sorts of things, but people generally will talk to one another. Within the digital setting, people still want to have that human connection and meet and talk to other people like them, but you have to call on different tools and functionality to make that a good experience. Is it an artificial intelligence system that connects people up through matchmaking so that they can have a conversation with someone who has a shared interest? So it's a different experience in the physical and the digital, but it meets that same need, which is to interact with other human beings. I think those are the sorts of things we all need to be thinking about for hybrid. And then, sorry to say one last thing, the tricky thing then is, where do those overlap? So then go back to networking. How does the physical event attendee network with the digital event attendee? That's where it gets really interesting and where the hybrid model, I think, can be very successful.
Absolutely. We've got something similar to that tomorrow evening with, it's a fun event. It's an award ceremony where we've got physical people, well, they're all physical people clearly, hosting tables of virtual 10 people on a table for dinner. And that's going to be interesting how that works. And then everybody's going to come in to the auditorium for the award ceremony. So we're all trying out this new technology. Where can we use technology and digital technology, maybe separate apps, so we're dual screening as well. There's lots and lots of stuff out there that we can really work with. And I think we were talking earlier around production values. I was talking about TV shows. I know, Dax, you were talking about events. And actually, I think we were talking about the same thing. I think we've got to combine the expertise of the video production world and the broadcast world with the expertise of the event world. Do you agree with that? Or Mike, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do, absolutely. And I think there's we are changed forever now. I think because of our collective experience of the last few months, and people are becoming much more fluent in virtual event technology, by necessity. But I think we have just to take into account when we're planning this now, how people absorb media, how people take on board, how they watch, how they like to watch things in bite-sized chunks. And I think, we might have to adapt our event, our hybrids to reflect that. But there's just one other thing I want to pick up on, which was about this, where we talked about the fact that travel is going to be reduced. People are, to reduce carbon emissions and all those types of good things. We've been doing these what we would have called link ups for many years, where you have these local audiences, and they haven't travelled for specific reasons, i.e. because it's saving money on travel and accommodation, it's mitigating the time that people have out of the business, for instance. But it's this idea about how do you take those elements of the face-to-face experience and put it into this kind of multi-venue hybrid activity. And the idea really is that you're having a whole series of local conferences, and they may be about your specific market, and then you join everybody together. And the reason you might join them together is that if it's a company with a global reach and they've got a new vision, or they might have might be embarking on a dynamic transformation, and they want to ensure that that entire community of professionals, which may number their thousands, understand and share in that process of evolution. And there's something really unique about these multi-venue hybrid events, is that they're a moment in time. It's a way of kind of unifying this whole group of people across different countries, different cultures, different languages, and you connect them and you energize them across your business network. It's a shared experience. And I think, it's taking the essence of face-to-face, but combining it in a virtual space, but still retaining that emotional connection.
So Charlotte, I'm sure we're going to have quite a lot of event professionals who've only produced real events watching now. What advice would you give to those people how to upskill themselves so they can create and design a hybrid? And what skills do you think you need to hone to create a brilliant hybrid event?
Well, I think, Dale, we're probably quite a good example of this, because we actually repositioned ourselves as more of an integrated communications agency at the back end of last year, obviously not knowing that this was coming around the corner. But I think it's a little disingenuous for all agency personnel to say that they are now specialists at delivering hybrid / online virtual events, because at the end of the day, it's a massive learning curve for a lot of people, and agencies haven't been stacked full of digital and technical specialists unless you are a much bigger agency and you've dedicated an entire team to this. So my personal advice is really doing a significant amount of research, which is what we have done as a small to medium-sized agency, and really looked at what platforms are the best platforms for the particular scenario. We have created very unique creative design around the event experience, whether online or incorporating an element of live for the future, so that actually there's a whole theme and there's a whole storyboard and a whole storytelling element to this experience. So I think the creative part of this is still very, very fundamental to the success. And so the design element's very, very important, but really we've become more embedded in the event consultancy basis for our client base. And we have project managed quite a few online events already, and we've produced them for a number of our clients. And actually we've got one on Friday for 700 people. It's a festival that we were meant to be producing this weekend up in Norfolk. And as a result, we can't, because it was meant to be for 1,200 actually, with 600 luxury bell tents and headline music acts, etc. And instead we're having to do a portion of it online. And so we've had to adapt very, very quickly in order to do that, but bringing on board and collaborating with the best specialists to help us to deliver that. And we are very transparent with our client base about it. And our suppliers are not all based in the UK. There are some based in Europe, but we've really looked into who we believe the best are in the marketplace, and being as transparent as possible, and looking at bringing on board individuals that can help us to deliver those service offerings is really what I think a lot of people will have to do.
Okay. Great. Anything from Dax? Mike, would you like to add
Yes,
anything
I'd
to
love
that?
okay. Yeah, if I can just add a couple of thoughts. First of all, we're all digital experts. We are all just about, I imagine, living fully ensconced in digital into our lives. And so I would say to you guys, think about what makes digital experiences effective. Look at your phone. What really works? Look at your streaming media account. What makes that a good experience? Look at what shopping on Amazon is like and why that's a decent experience. Take lessons from what's happening in online gaming. I mean, there's loads of digital stuff going on that we all are experiencing that we can use our creativity and consider how do we bring them into a virtual setting. Otherwise, I completely agree. I don't think we should, as event people, necessarily profess to be technology experts. There are loads of technology experts out there, and there's constant innovation. It's impossible, unless that's what your life is dedicated to understand everything going on in technology. So find the people who you can ping ideas off of, who are the technologists, and you bring your creativity and say, here's what I think we should do. Can we make this work? And then let them think about the technologies to enable it, rather than starting with what are the technologies and how do we create an event out of the technology. Be creative.
And actually on that, we've got a question in from Andy at PRG. What is the role of online platforms and how can traditional events companies work best with them? You want to pick that one up?
Existing online platforms. So for instance, we're talking about Skype or Zoom or anything like that. Is that the question?
Visible.
Choose your platform, maybe.
Blue Jeans. There's a million of them.
Yeah, I mean, there is. I mean, there is so many. We developed our own. So this is something our developers put together ourselves because we just couldn't find one that did what we wanted to do. And there are loads. I tend to look at the platforms as the venue. So selecting your platform, how you would select a venue. So if you're having a small meeting, a board meeting, okay, you'd have Teams or Zoom. If you're having a slightly larger meeting, a leadership meeting maybe for 100 people, maybe you go down something like Webinar Jam or whatever, and then you're going for the thousands and thousands of delegates. What would you choose then? So I think you've got to be really careful that you try and choose the right platform, and it's easier said than done, for the right meeting in the same way as you would choose a venue. That would be my answer on that one. Let's go on to Charlotte. Let's talk about monetizing, virtual and hybrid. What are the venue? I've got venues on the head now. What are the revenue streams, and what are the implications, say, for sponsorship?
I think that if we're looking at online events in a similar capacity to the way in which we would be delivering monetization of a live event, I don't think they can be looked at entirely differently. There are similarities there. Obviously, there are also huge differences, but there are similarities there. I think that it's people are very prepared to pay for a delegate rate to attend online events, assuming and understanding that the content is absolutely adding value to the audience and that it is highly interactive, enormously engaging, and that people are going to take away something really valuable from that experience. So I think one revenue stream obviously is delegate participation. The other revenue stream, especially with larger events and exhibitions and client consumer product launches, those types of events, sponsorship is obviously usually a large part of those. Online sponsorship is still very significant, and there is a very specific route to market for that. I think one way of looking at sponsorship is perhaps more as looking at as if they are online adverts. So having an advert before the actual event takes place, so that it's running prior to the event actually starting, having that advert running during refreshment breaks, and also it's obviously sponsorship is about brand association at the end of the day. So It's about delivering that content online in the right way. So that's definitely, sponsorship is definitely something that is very, very achievable in an online forum, but it just needs to be considered with the right format and how it's delivered.
I think you're right, and I think certainly at the start of virtual a few months ago, where we were doing sponsored events, sponsors were like, well, we're pulling out, we're not getting the same as being at the actual event. But now it's turned into, actually, we're getting more coverage because we're tending to get more delegates online than at what would have been at the event. There's more opportunities, you say, Charlotte, for digital marketing, ad breaks, banners, and also breakouts and conversations, smaller conversations and campfires with those sponsors. So actually it opens up a whole group of possibilities for more sponsorship going forward. I've got another question here from Anonymous. What elements of your communication strategy best lend themselves to the hybrid model? So what type of client situation might benefit the most? Anybody want to pick that up?
Well, as I think I said, as I said earlier, I think, launching a new strategy or a new vision, or, where there are companies undergoing any sort of transformation program, I think, and wanting to communicate that as a clear and consistent message across a network of professionals is a key way of using a hybrid event, and energizing people, making sure that that message is clear, and that when it comes for whoever is the audience having to share it down with their community, that they're absolutely crystal clear about what the direction is that the organization is going in.
And so Charlotte.
I think one major advantage of communications within this particular realm that we're talking about now is that the content can be clipped down, and the longevity of it and the evolvement of that content, it can go on and on and on, which obviously when you go to a live event, yes, there are campaigns pre, during and post the event, but in this instance there's so much content that's being farmed out now in the online realm that one's able to really maximize on that from a content perspective and elongate campaigns for much longer potentially.
Absolutely. And I think one thing I've noticed is the speed these things can be turned around, where we put an event on, a company conference, a sales conference, we may take 6 months to put it together. If the CEO wants to change strategy and communicate that strategy, we can do that in a matter of days. Whether it's hybrid as well, if you're just going to do it in their head office. Also, I think the analytics and the data we can get back is much more powerful than in some cases that we can get on the floor, on the ground at an event. And certainly the analytics we've seen of what they're watching, how they've interacted, what questions they've asked, and how we've responded as well. Anything you want to add on that, Dax?
Yeah, particularly on the question of data and measurement, because it is quite interesting. You can get loads of data out of these virtual events. The question is, what does the data mean? And I think sometimes we get romanced by data. So we might say, well, we had this many people and they stayed for this long and they engaged in these activities and they viewed this content. The challenge is, as with a physical event, how do you then turn that into meaningful insight about whether the event delivered on objectives? And I go back to same old tools that I use for physical events, surveying, asking people, observation, to really then connect the dots between what we're seeing and people are doing and the actual impact on goals and objectives. So I just would say it's a word of caution. Be a little bit careful not to get overly romanced by the data. The data is great. It's interesting. It can help you improve moving forward, but it doesn't always tell you the deeper level of, did this actually do what we wanted it to do?
Absolutely. And I totally agree with that, because you need to set clear benchmarks and objectives that we can measure against. And for me, it's always, what did the audience do differently after they've been to the live event, been to an exhibition, or they watched a virtual event? What did they do differently? And if they did nothing differently, no behavioral change, then then you really wasted your money in investing in that. Okay, let's just take a look for another question. No, I'm just going to talk about the future of hybrid. And Dax, you talked about, you shared your vision earlier on. Tell us a little bit more where you think hybrid is going.
Well, I think it's going to be really interesting to go back to a few points, like, for example, about the revenue model and the pricing model. I don't think we know yet. There's not enough evidence to support like what you should charge people. Do you charge something different for the virtual digital attendee versus the physical attendee? For example, do you charge something different for a physical sponsor versus an online sponsor? These are outstanding questions I think our industry has got to sort out. There is no benchmark data that we can call on to inform a point of view. And I will say also the other tricky thing, even about designing hybrid events, is the world is so different now than it has been in the past. So even like you three we've been producing hybrid events. That doesn't mean that past will inform the future. I don't think any of us know what's going to happen, but if we do put our prediction hat on, as I said earlier, I think we can assume that physical events will need to be smaller, that there will be biosecurity measures for a hybrid event for the physical element, where we need to make sure social distancing and hygiene, and we're really being considerate of making people feel safe in the physical setting. We need to then think about what is the digital experience and how is it as good as the physical experience. I think that's one of the trickiest things we as an industry have to think about. How is the sponsor experience in digital as good as it is when they meet with a potential like qualified lead in a physical setting? And I do think we can find ways to match make qualified attendees in digital with the sponsors that they should be talking to. And so again, I think it's about creating almost like two paths. Like, let's think about a journey, right? You have an audience, a potential audience for a hybrid event. You invite the entire audience and you allow them to choose. Am I going to take the digital journey or am I going to take the physical journey? Then, because they make that choice, you then separate the experiences and you allow them to have an excellent event, whether they're joining us live or online. And then you bring both of those constituent audiences back together, or you find moments in time to bring the audiences online and off and in physical together. And then everyone comes back together at the end. So I think this is just such an interesting communications challenge. And I think we have to consider that we want the experience to be as good for the digital attendee as it is for the physical one. I think that's the challenge we have as an industry.
Absolutely. And we've got a question related to that, which I've been asked many times over the last few weeks. Do we think virtual and now hybrid will replace face-to-face? You're shaking your head, Charlotte.
I think that I think people, and I think if lockdown is anything to go by, I think there's a lot of people that are desperate now to get out and re-experience that face-to-face connection. I think it is very hard, as much as we are absolutely dedicated to producing more hybrid and virtual events, and that is definitely here to stay. I definitely don't think they will ever be able to replace them in its entirety. I think we also have to ask the question, there are an awful lot of challenges that our clients are facing now and we've done a survey recently to try to understand what our clients' challenges actually are. And a lot of it, we have to be mindful of the fact that a lot of people who are in events teams are now, departments are merging now. So they're merging with marketing departments, they're merging with communications departments, because the perception is that live events will certainly not be taking place for the foreseeable future. And so it's being able to respond to the challenges that our clients are facing and support and guide and help in that respect that's of paramount importance at the moment, and looking at what is best to help navigate people through this particular time. And I think this time is evolving, it is changing, as if this time has taught us anything, is literally week by week things are evolving and moving and changing. And what the conversations that we were having back in April are certainly not the conversations that we are now having in July. That is for certain.
absolutely. Mike, what's your take on that question?
I agree with Charlotte. I think that, face to face will still be here to stay. It might be in a changed format, but I think, in terms of the the hybrid experience, as we start to move forward, with technology, and we start to emulate, really, I suppose, the live experience. So, we've seen lots of examples recently of, fantastic 3D environments where, we're creating the experience of visiting an event virtually, but with these live elements, as we said before, using things like augmented reality and many different types of interaction. And I think, as we start to move forward, that will increase, the use of virtual reality, avatars, all that type of stuff that brings that where you start to blur, I suppose, the lines between live and virtual will start to come more and more to the forefront. That may be sometime in the future, but I think all that type of stuff will continue. But there will still be that need for, a face-to-face element. And and how do we bring some of those elements of face-to-face into the virtual world? We chatted earlier about your idea around getting people to kind of experience the different foods and things like that. So an event is made up of lots of different elements. There's the face-to-face conference, there's awards, there's dinners, there's breakouts. All those elements are going to be brought together, can be brought together if we can think creatively about how we can blur that line between live and virtual.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about we were talking about the food, a food story I told earlier in the rehearsal. We did a hybrid event for a international food company where they wanted to have a bit of fun, and with their areas in Philadelphia, in Taiwan, across Europe, and we just sent the food out, people cooked it, and then we just had a big food tasting competition and people voting for the next product that's going to hit the retail market. And it was a lot of fun, but it was great to get all that cultural variations and comments at one time. We could have just sent it all out and said, okay, come back in a week, but we did it all in one day, and it was great fun. And actually, connected question from Emily here. Do you think the demand for digital content will still be as high once we return to the normal? And I think we've covered quite a bit of that. We've done some research, and our head of insight and innovation, Callum Gill, rates live events from a gauge of 1 to 5. And he said in the norm, live events engagement is about 1.8, people wanting to go to live events. His prediction is, once we do get back to whatever normal is going to be, it will go up to 5. It will spike because people, as you say, Charlotte, will be absolutely desperate to get out there and do that face-to-face, and then it will come back slowly back down to the 1.8. Good. Any comments on that? Any feedback, guys? Dax, you've been quiet for a bit.
I'll offer a counterpoint to my colleagues on the panel, which is that digital has replaced physical human interaction. I mean, that's the world we're living in. And it's so funny because I was just thinking the other day, I feel closer to my colleagues at Smyle than I did before lockdown, because I'm spending a lot more time in very close interaction with them. It's not physically face-to-face, but it's digitally face-to-face. And I suspect actually that what's going to happen is there will no longer be this boundary between a physical conversation with another person and a digital or online conversation with another person. I think we are all getting much more used to how do we have an effective, authentic, emotionally rich conversation with people using our cameras, which is new and it feels uncomfortable and awkward at first. But I think because so many of us are working remotely, we're getting very accustomed to it. Yes, I want to go back and hug a few people and shake a few hands, and that would be great. But I think it will be much more of an integrated approach where I have naturally fluid conversations that go back and forth between digital and physical.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've seen more collaboration in the last 3 months than before when people were all in the office. And I had a call with one of our teams, the motion graphics teams, who were really excited because they have a 10-minute fun session every morning, catch up, which they would never do in the office. And they know more about each other and what they're doing now than they did then. So I think you're absolutely right. So does that mean, Charlotte, then if we're in the events world, the face-to-face world, we need to step up now and really make our face-to-face events really work if we're on the tail of digital?
I'm not sure how to answer that question, because I think that we've been doing a very, very good job up until virtuals had to step up, really, or the online world has really taken over. My personal view is that it's very hard to maintain and build a company culture online, and I still stick by that. And I think that a lot of companies will struggle with that. I think it's obviously one can have as many meetings as you want on a daily basis online through various mediums. And yes, obviously we can create highly engaging events online, but I still think that there is it's very hard to replace that physical connection that you have with somebody, certainly from a networking perspective, at a live event. So my personal view is I feel quite strongly that, you know, getting back into an office environment is key, and having that physical presence is key. And so I think live events will continue to prosper, but what it has done is it's shaken up, you know, what certain companies may not have really understood or known in the virtual realm and in the online realm, and it's really made a step up in that area.
We're running out of time, so I've got a couple of questions here from Annette. We're a small venue. We can host 2,000 people. That doesn't seem like a small venue, but should we consider our own virtual platform, and is there a recommendation, a platform we could buy? Oh, I would hate to give that advice, really, whether they should buy their own platform. Any thoughts on that?
And there's so many platforms out there. Why look at what's out there and develop a relationship with a good one? You know, I think there's so many options. I wouldn't make that investment.
I would agree with that, because I think you're going to get different companies, different organizations coming in wanting different things. And if you're stuck with one platform, you could get into problems there. You mentioned 3D avatar event experiences blurring the lines between virtual and real. Taking 3D avatars out of the equation, how else can we blur the lines? Mike, you've blurred those lines quite a few times on events. Taking away the 3D, take away augmented reality, how have you done it?
Well, it's, you know, as I said, it's if you're trying to take a face-to-face intervention and add a virtual element into it, to me the whole essence of, you know, face-to-face is the emotional connection that we've been talking about. You know how people relate to each other. And I think, you know, where it works, still think where it works best of all is where you can create that shared experience. So, you know, where we don't want to travel, where we do want to, you know, create local events, but then connect people together. You know, in my experience, you know, whatever kind of venue you use or whatever the network is, I think, you know, creating that kind of moment in time of unity is a really powerful virtual experience, a very powerful hybrid experience.
Great. Well, it looks like we're just about running out of time. I totally agree. There's lots and lots of things you can do. And I think I always say to people, it's not about the technology. It's about creating those experiences. The technology is just a tool, as so is a venue, so is the AV kit and everything else that goes with it. Just think about it as just another tool in your toolbox. So thank you to Charlotte, Dax, Mike, and everyone who's joined us today. Reminder, next week, the virtual Clarion Awards, they're coming from these studios, and we're going to be doing some fun cocktail making as well. So we'll be sending out some instructions on what you need for that and having a bit of fun. Please go to the EVCOM site and register for the show. Also, if you haven't already, please enter the EVCOM Industry Awards. That closing date is Monday. All the details are on the EVCOM site. So thank you for joining, and goodbye.